This video is on how to improve employee net promoter score. Why does it matter? What is it? How does it work? And how is it ultimately going to improve the performance in your business or organization? My name is Jackson Kirchis. I'm a managing partner at Happiness Means Business and Warrior Leader Training Companies, where we help leaders solve their people problems, applying the science of happiness and human flourishing to improve performance. A few years ago, we helped a battalion in the Army National Guard, and they were struggling with their production, which then had a ripple effect out into recruiting and retention. You know, you ever struggle with that question? We can't seem to find and keep the right people. How do we attract, retain, and engage talent? So what we looked at with them is the culture or the climate. Now, in their context, they were already looking at what the employee experience is like, so to speak. And to turn this into a short story, we focused on people first, and then the business, and then the outcomes. And what we saw over about a year is all these metrics around the employee experience, which we'll talk about with ENPS, improved. And as a consequence, they saw a 34% improvement in production, which led them to meeting or exceeding every single one of their recruiting and retention goals for the first time in 6 years. So the message here is that start with the people, your most important asset. So you need the right tool and you need to use it in the right way, because so often something like culture, something like engagement, like workforce experience, like these all sound very intangible and like touchy-feely feelings. That's not what this is about. You see, ENPS is a simple assessment. It means Employee Net Promoter Score. And it's a way of assessing the level of loyalty, satisfaction, engagement, and commitment of your workforce. And it's really simple. One question: how likely are you to recommend working at this organization? You see how powerful that is for affecting recruiting, for retention, and ultimately the level of engagement in your workforce? Because what that sets up, of course, is a way to check in more consistently with how you're doing as an organization, but ultimately, and we'll talk about this in a second, identify obstacles, opportunities, options, and eventually solutions to make that number go up and foster that long-term loyalty, engagement, productivity, and all the good things that come with it. Before we get into it, the last thing I want to encourage you to remember is something called Goodhart's Law. And if you think about this in your organization, you'll probably see it showing up in other places. What that means is when a metric becomes the goal, it's no longer a good metric. Think about that. Say you want to lose weight because you want to, be healthier. Well, all of a sudden you get so obsessed with the number on the scale that you're saying, hey, well, I'm going to, shave my head and I'm going to stop drinking water for 3 days and I lost 3 pounds. Well, you mistook the metric for the goal behind what you're trying to do. So similarly with ENPS, you're trying to create a destination workplace where people are engaged and committed, inspired, and loyal. It's not so much about, well, what if we phrase the question this way, or we don't ask these people, or we ask these people so that we can, tell the boss that the number went up. No, it's not about the metric. It's about what it represents. So what does a system look like for this? So the beauty of this is because it's only 1 to maybe 3 questions, which we'll talk about, because you have that initial, how likely are you to recommend working here? But then you also have the opportunity to then simply ask, why? What could we do better? What are we already doing well? But a mature system looks like this. You're doing this pulse once a month or once a quarter, okay? It's far superior than the traditional every 2 years we do an engagement survey and we see a bunch of data and it costs our HR function hundreds of hours and then we kind of talk about it for a month and then nothing really happens, okay? The frequency of this is powerful. And you enter into a cycle that I sometimes call grow, which means goal, reality, options, and way forward. And that creates sort of a cycle. So your goal, you may set out, what's our number? What do we want in terms of an ENPS that we can be really happy with? Do we want, from 1 to 10 on average, do we want an 8? Do we want a 9? What are some of our industry peers doing? What would be a good baseline? These are benchmarks that you can kind of assess or find, or just, set something as a baseline. Reality, of course, you need to understand where you're at. That's where the actual assessment comes in. Here's where we want to be. We need to figure out where are we now. And then once you have the here's where we are, here's where we want to go, that takes you to the O. What are the options? What are the opportunities? What are the obstacles? And that's where the survey can be quite helpful as well, is helping you to structure the problem and understand what some of the drivers are behind the number. If the number is doing really well, what can you build on? If the number's poor, often your workforce is going to tell you. And the beauty of this with the open-ended questions is that nowadays with the improvements in LLMs, also known as AI, you can take all of those open-ended text responses, say if you have 500 or 1,000 employees, and pull that into a text recognition software and extract the most common insights, the most common complaints, the most common themes or pain points. And then the last part of that cycle for grow is goal reality, exploring your options, opportunities, and obstacles. What's the way forward? How can we develop solutions? Something that can help you to do that is a process called Kaizen. So this typically is done in operational context. You pull together a group of what I often call authentic informal leaders. So these are people who may be leaders in the org chart, but also maybe people in your company you can probably think of who, even if they're not a high level, leader on the org chart, they have a lot of influence. They have a lot of emotional connection in the organization. People kind of look to them maybe for answers or to understand the culture, right? The people who have kind of keystones in your organization, often at the very front line or frontline supervisor. So you invite them into the process, and Kaizen is pretty simple. You say, hey, here's where we're at right now. Let's set a stretch goal. If we wanted to have a 20% improvement in our ENPS this year, which is really hard to do, how could we do that? How could we restructure or shape or optimize the employee experience? And through that facilitated process that may take, a couple afternoons with that group, or maybe a one-day retreat, or a few hours over several weeks. Don't make it more complicated than it has to be. But you're going to get some ideas and solutions there, which then you can test or seek feedback on from various work groups or functional areas within the company. And then finally, coming out of that, you should have that way forward that I mentioned. Start to implement it and check in over the next 3 to 6 months and keep the cycle going. So you get into this mature system of continuous improvement where, let's say once a quarter, we're looking at this, we're testing out a couple interventions and seeing over time how that creates a cycle of gradually improving our employee experience. Final thought I'll share with you here that can be helpful is make sure you try to structure the problem. Now what that means is if you start to get stuck and you say, well, our ENPS is relatively flat and we keep asking people why, but we're not really getting the insights we want, think about how you can break down the drivers of workplace experience into its component parts. So a simple way to do that, model we sometimes share, is why, who, what, how. So the why is the level of the mission and engagement. So do people feel inspired by the purpose of the company? Are people able to use their strengths? Do they feel the work is meaningful and aligned with their values? Right? Those are all sub things that you can investigate in the survey, or you can investigate in these conversations and work groups with your authentic informal leaders. The who is, are people connected to one another? Gallup has found that if someone has a best friend at work, they are 700% more engaged, 700% more committed, loyal, and inspired. So you can see, are people feeling like they have genuine relationships grounded in trust and safety at work? The how, okay, that's all about the ways of working, making sure people feel autonomy, okay, they're not micromanaged, making sure they feel competence, like there's recognition for the work they do and opportunities to grow, that they have sufficient work-life balance, okay, that their processes and systems make sense. That's the how. And then finally, the what you don't want to overlook. The what is just simply like, are the roles clear? Are you receiving adequate compensation and benefits? Do our core competencies and policies make sense? So again, those are all areas that you can investigate to try to find root causes that may be affecting your ENPS. Finally, as you think about implementing some of these solutions, lean into your promoters, your authentic informal leaders, and your people that are most inspired and most committed to recommending your company, as often these are going to be your internal champions to drive this process of continuous improvement. So hope this gives you an idea. It should look different for every organization, but I encourage you to think about how you can implement a simple ENPS system to continually improve your workplace experience and invest in your most important asset, your people. If you want to learn more, reach out to us. Jackson Kirchis, happinessmeansbusiness.com, warriorleadertraining.com. Happy to chat, share examples, anything we can do, and stay along with our channel and newsletter as well for more quick tips on happiness and success in your organization. Thanks for watching.